Excellent, thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Keith Casey. My title really is API problem solver. It's on my business card, so it must be true. If everyone could do me a favor at some point, if I say something useful to you, tweet about it. My boss doesn't actually know if I'm working this week or not because I'm 9 hours time zone off. So as far as she knows, I'm just spending every day at the pub. Okay, so if you could help with that, I'd appreciate it. I'm Casey Software there. A few things about myself. One, I need to turn on my clicker, that's a useful thing. One, I'm from the great state of Texas. Nice thing is, if you ever need to know if a man's from Texas, if he is, he'll tell you. If he's not, you'll just embarrass him. And most people don't understand exactly how big Texas is. I live in Austin, which is roughly the center. From Austin, I can drive 6 hours in any direction, and I'm still in Texas. It's huge. In fact, it's so big that if you take all of Europe, it fits inside. Texas fits inside Texas, too. And in fact, if you take the entire landmass of the world, it actually fits in Texas. So yes, it is bigger on the inside. It's kind of a weird situation, and some of what I just said was not true. You can figure out which pieces. But to be serious for a second, I've been an API guy now for almost 20 years. I run API programs at Okta. My product is API access management. OAuth is a service fundamentally. I live and breathe these things. And I live and breathe bad API security issues. I help a lot of customers figure out what are they doing right, what are they doing wrong, how do we help them do it better. Before that, I spent a couple years at Twilio. I was employee number 25 there when nobody knew what Twilio was. They're like, why would I want to send a text message? That was a fun time to be there. I've done a number of other startups and fun things along those lines. I also wrote the book on API design. And I have no shame in saying that because the URL is literally theapidesignbook.com. It's not an API design book or another API design book. It is the apidesignbook.com. All right. But probably the thing I'm most proud of is I love living on the edge. I love figuring out what the edge of a system is because we're really good at defining the happy path. We're really good at figuring out if everything goes well, here's what goes on. It's those edges. It's where people step outside our specification. It's where they try and figure out what's the limit here, that things get really fun. So if you're familiar with Ken Lane, the API evangelist, apparently I scare him. Which is a good place to be. This is what I sort of think about, is I want to make sure that we're just a little scared at times, that we have to stop and ponder, what is our API doing? What is our API capable of? And if we don't do it well, what happens? So that, I'm going to talk real quick about API domain overview. I assume everyone here knows what API means. If not, you're at the wrong event, I'm sorry. But sort of, when I sit down with customers in the States, this is sort of how I'd explain it. Real simply, people want to be able to buy new cars, so they run a credit report. They go ahead and they interact with their car company. They get a loan. They get insurance set up and everything. This is the happy path. This is how we want things to work. We want a smooth, streamlined experience where the customer gets their job done quickly, easily, and without pain. But stop and think about some of the information that's going back and forth here. We have financial data, we have personally identifiable information, we have credit data, we have, who knows what else we have here. We have systems like Experian, not Equifax. Equifax is a different company. But we have Experian being able to share select pieces of data, unlike Equifax, which just shares everything. We have Experian that shares very limited subsets of data and being able to make that shareable, make that reusable with other agencies. We have Capital One, who obviously is a gigantic bank and wants to be able to issue a loan to help somebody. We have Geico, which can actually pull your driving record from the state to be able to figure out, is this person a driver? What insurance rate should we charge them? This is connecting to a lot of things, which makes for a lot of risk. And fundamentally, when we look at this from the back end, we have these three groups involved. We have the back-end developers. These are the people that are designing, building, deploying our APIs. We have the front-end developers. They're the ones integrating our APIs, pulling them into mobile apps, into single-page apps, into other systems, into your car, your television, whatever. And then we have our security architects. So I have a firm belief that developers have two goals in life. One, to build something useful. right? We all want to build something useful. We want to make sure that when we spend days, weeks, months building something, or in Daniel's case from yesterday, 22 years building something, that it's valued, that people see our work and they go, yes, I want to use that. So our first goal is we want to build something useful. The other goal, we want to go home. Right? Because we have families, we have other interests, we have other things we want to do. And the absolute last thing we want is to get called at 2 a.m. about a problem. The last thing we want is our CTO, our CIO, our CEO calling us and saying, hey, you know that thing you deployed? Just for the record, any call that starts like that is probably bad. Brush up your resume. So developers have 2 goals in life. Build something useful and go home. Front-end developers, they have 2 goals in life also. Anyone want to guess what their goals are? Build something useful and go home. Pretty straightforward. Security people have a different goal in life. They have 1 goal in life. Their goal is to say no. Right? Yeah, I see a couple people back there nodding. I know who you are. No, actually, that's not fair. I'm going after the security people. That's not the security people's goal in life. Their goal in life is to protect the organization, right? Because when that call happens at 2 a.m, when the CEO, CIO, CTO, whoever calls, let's be honest, they're not calling you, right? When that breach happened at Equifax, they didn't call up the developers. Who'd they call? They called the security team, and they said, guys, what the hell? Right? And there's a lot of people that were looking for jobs shortly afterwards. I would wager very few developers suffered any consequences there. So we have these 3 groups that are fundamentally at war with each other because the developers, both back-end and front-end, want to ship code and go home. We want more people using our code every day. And security people go, whoa, wait a minute. You're doing what? This is doomed. This leads to massive failure. So with that, I want to talk about failure. Because this is the sort of thing that if we're not thinking about this, the results are catastrophic. And actually, this is one of the things I call on every person in this room to stop and think about what we're doing here. Because the consequences are only getting bigger from here on out. You know, we laugh about the latest security breach. You're not going to laugh when it's your company on the news. Odds are many companies are already on the news. My favorite out of all these is the Tinder hack. Is anyone familiar with that one? Oh, so Tinder's kind of a dating app. Sort of. But the hack there was really interesting because they didn't do any validation, any authorization for the API. So assuming you had an account, which everyone on Facebook has an account, so if you have an account, I'm not saying anything. But everyone on Facebook had an account, so you could log into Tinder, and then you could hijack the actual communications behind the scenes and send anyone a message. As anyone. Yeah, that led to all kinds of fun. So that's an amusing one, and that's bad. Could lead to all kinds of problems. But the one that's actually more interesting is British Airways. They had a breach, I think it was about 1.5 years ago now, where their passport data was available by the API behind their mobile app. Earlier this year, I think it was June, they got fined 180 million pounds. Which I'm not sure the exchange rate at the moment, but it's like 200 million euro, $230 million for that breach. To the best of my knowledge, that's the largest single fine for a breach like that. Now, I assume most of us would lose our jobs if we caused a breach even a fraction of that size. I mean, Facebook is trying really hard to beat that record, but fundamentally, we need to be aware of these sorts of things. We need to understand that while there's money on the line right now, as healthcare records come online, as more financial records come online, as more things connect, as that pacemaker connects, as that car connects, as that elevator connects, the consequences are going to be lives. And it's our responsibility to do something about it. It's our responsibility to make sure that the systems we're using and that we're building, that we're considering, are secure. Not far-fetched, right? But let's roll back a little bit, because I doubt anyone in this room purposely built an insecure system. In fact, the way most APIs start, it's with your team, right? You build this one thing, and you get tired of building it over and over and over and over and over again. Because remember, we want to build something useful and go home. The biggest impediment to going home is having to build the same freaking thing 4 times. We want to build it once. We want to build it once, make sure it works, and then walk away. So most APIs start as APIs for our team, where we have 5 people using our API. And odds are we can look around the room, we could see all 5 of those people. And if somebody does something dumb, we can go, hey, stop doing that. And they will, because they sit within arm's reach. I'm not suggesting anything there. Draw your own conclusions. But you know what? One of the best metrics for people finding our work useful is more people using it today than they did yesterday. So at some point, some other team finds out about that API, and they go, wow, that thing that you built, we were actually considering the same thing. Can we use that too? And of course, since we're awesome developers, since we're awesome architects, we say, yes, please use my API. It's fantastic. And so we start thinking about versioning, we start thinking about compatibility, we start thinking about scalability. At this point, we probably consider an API gateway. We start deploying it to not just our team, but that team down the hall, the team across campus. And this is great. We went from 5 people to 5 teams. Hey, that's success. And then it grows. Because at some point, a VP or a C-level exec gets involved. And they go, hey, that team down the hall, actually, we have a partner. We have a customer who has a lot of the same use cases. Can we let them have it too? And we say, more people using our API? That sounds great. And so we open it up a little bit further. Now, something different happened here. We let people off our network, outside of our infrastructure, outside of our control, use it now. So we went from 5 people to 5 teams to 5 organizations. We can't just look around the room and see everyone that's using our API now. And at this point, the CEO gets involved. And the CEO has digital transformation in their annual goals. If you're the CEO and you've said that, I'm not sorry. And they say, so, development team, this is a great API. This solves all kinds of great problems that our customers have. That's going to send us into the new century doing amazing work. We're going to be able to monetize this. We're going to be able to do all kinds of great things and integrate in ways that no one ever envisioned. We are now a digital-first company. Yeah, everyone's heard some of the variations of these, right? And then so the CEO or the CIO or the CISO or the CTO, one of those C-level guys, walks over to the security team. And they say, hey, security team, we're launching this great new API. It's fantastic. It's going to solve all these problems. We're launching in 30 days. We need you to validate it. Make sure it's secure. But don't worry, it probably is. We've been using it for a year. Security team hears one thing in that entire sentence. What was it? We've been using it for a year. Because the security team, they have a bad week ahead of them, don't they? Because they have to stop and they have to look at this API and they have to say, what does this API do? Wait, who built this? Wait, who has access to this? And they have a lot of scary questions to ask. And by the way, it's launching in 30 days. Oh, actually, here's the truth. It launched a year ago. Oops. So now they're in a position where they have to say, hey, CEO, no, you can't do that. Or they have to go, hey, we need to re-architect this whole thing in the next 30 days. You just made some security team's life miserable. Good job. This is a really bad, scary place to be because we know, the security team knows, that any vulnerability they find at this point has actually applied the whole time. So any attacks that can happen next in 30 days actually might have been happening a year ago. Nobody knows. That should terrify you. You know the security team is losing some sleep over this one. So we need to think about how we secure our APIs. We need to think about how we start securing them early in the process. If we say, only 5 people are using our API, stop that. Because if your API is successful, if more people use your API, which remember, that's one of our goals, right? We want more people to use our systems. We want more customers. We want more partners. If our API is successful, there will be 5, 50, 500 people using it in no time whatsoever. So how do we secure it? So I sort of boil this down to a handful of principles. So aspect 1 is we only expose the interfaces we need. It's pretty clear. Like, we want to limit the attack surface. Okay, that makes sense. Next up, we only want to collect and share the data we need. If we accept a credit card number, there's very few reasons we should ever expose that again, right? I'm not getting any acknowledgement to that. Thanks, guys. You make me nervous. And next up is we only want to grant access to the people and systems we need. All this is like security 101, right? There's no big surprise here. But as software developers, do we start counting at number 1? No, what do we start counting at? So I say aspect number 0 is we need to think like a bad guy. We need to put on our black hats and have fun. I mean, we need to be responsible, ethical hackers of our own systems to figure out how to attack these things. So we need to stop and consider, how do we think like a bad guy? Because most of us don't. Most of us won't. Most of us are challenged to do something like that. So I have a few steps on this one. First of all, read the news. Look at your competitors. See what they're struggling with. See what they're talking about. All those icons or logos that I had just a few minutes ago, look up those companies. Look at their breaches. See if you're vulnerable to the same things. Odds are you are, but double check. I know no one likes talking to lawyers. Get over it. Because just like our security team, the lawyer's single job in the organization is to protect the organization. So go and ask them. Preface it with, we do not know of any breach or any leaked data, but I have some questions. Okay, if you just say, hey, what would happen if our data got out? Don't do that. They're lawyers, they live in like an adrenaline state, but it's an adrenaline state that results in bad things. Just don't freak out your lawyers, okay? But ask them, say, hey, look, we've seen all these breaches of the news. We don't know of one that's happened to us, but if something happened, what would be the consequences? Are there legal, are there fines, are there compliance issues? What would happen? Have that conversation. If nothing else, take them out to lunch and then they owe you one. Okay, I know your organization's fantastic, okay? Your organization is one, you hire the top 1% of developers. Everyone in the room hires top 1% of developers, but everyone has worked for a bad organization. Ask your other team members about their horror stories. I used to work for a company that the username was your 4-digit employee ID, and it was fixed 4 digits. I guess we weren't going to grow. And the password was the last 4 digits of your social security number. The user ID was on your badge that you'd have to wear to get in the building. The 4 digits of your social security number, okay. It's not particularly, well, it is easily guessable, but we didn't have any rate limiting on our systems. Because we didn't have a federated identity, we had that information copied in every system. We had local development copies of everybody's social security number. That's fantastic. Odds are your team has stories like that. Talk to them. Find out about bad situations that have happened before. I know your current organization is great. Ask them to remember. And next up, this is actually my favorite. Write a Black Mirror episode. Black Mirror is great. It takes existing technology and concepts and says, but wait, what if we twisted this just a little bit and took it a step further? Do the same thing with your APIs. You know, when Google Home and Nest and all those sort of things start coming up, my wife's like, this would be fantastic. Let's get one for our house. And I was like, I would love the idea of a voice interface too. Can we wait 2 years? And she's like, well, why? And I said, because none of the privacy rules or regulations or any of this stuff has been figured out, and it's going to get scary. Can we wait 2 years and reevaluate? And that 2 years actually ended about 1.5 years ago. And she goes, no. We need to think about what happens when our tools, the things that we build, are used against us in some way. One of the things we need to understand is, what does a bad guy want? And everyone says, oh, money. Yeah, that's easy. That's not too hard. Let's get a little more creative. They want valuable data. Value doesn't just mean money. In the case of the Equifax hack, that's one really interesting one because it has all your social security number, all your addresses going back to whatever, to the point where now I can fake your identity for decades to come. Thanks, guys. They want accessible infrastructure because maybe you're not the target, maybe your partner is. The target hack actually came in because somebody was able to connect to the Wi-Fi of the HVAC systems and then launch an attack against Target itself and get access to credit card numbers. that happens. Bad guys love simple or no authentication. You should always have some form of authentication. The fact that I have to say that's kind of silly. But even if you have a totally free API, it's public information, you never plan to charge, you need a way to be able to reach out to people to tell them about upgrades. Tell them about feature changes. Get authentication information. Please, get a login. Even better though, they love custom authentication and authorization systems. If you want to attract hackers, build your own. It's a great way to do it. And probably most importantly of all, they want to act undetected and unmonitored. If they can act slowly over time, they get an opportunity to do a lot more. The Marriott breach went from 2014 through 2018. They had 4 years in that system. Who knows what they did? Because all that traffic, well, they could move nice and slow, nice and easy, just blend their traffic in with everything else. So the odds of them being detected, or the odds of detecting malicious traffic within the overall traffic, is effectively 0. So that's incredibly valuable to them. To get practical for a second, a couple things we should do. Use an API gateway. I mean, that's really easy. That should be really obvious by now. There's different ones, good for different purposes. I'm not going to recommend a particular one. We have got a number that are sponsors here this week. That's fantastic. Most API gateways, or more properly, API management platforms, are good at a handful of things. The vast majority do these 5 things. Now, in a security perspective, there's only a couple we care about. We want to make sure that the interfaces that we open are only the ones that are shared, and we want to make sure there's some sort of access control, access management on it. That's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But API management platforms will handle quite a bit more. Use one. Next up, let's be smarter about the data we have. If we don't, well, especially GDPR, if we don't have to capture it, don't. And I would say, we know the obvious things of encrypted at rest, secured in flight, everything like that. But there's one company that I'm not going to name that they went ahead and they took all their credit card information and they stored it for years and years and years. And they encrypted it at rest, which was great. The kind of bad thing about that, though, is they stored the encryption key with the data. So that's the equivalent of the Post-it note sitting on the side of your monitor. Everyone knows that, right? Oh, good. No one agreed with that. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, if your odds are, the way this organization went through their audit process is they had a security checklist, and they said, is the data encrypted? They said, oh, we need to encrypt it. And they went ahead and wired up some encryption, stored the key with it, and they said, yes, it's encrypted. Meets requirements. We've never said that before, have we? And one of the last things I want to throw out here is stick to the standards. If you're trying to roll your own encryption, authentication, authorization, anything like that, stop. Don't. There are people who have been thinking about this for years. There's thousands of people who have been thinking about this for years and trying to figure out the best approaches for things. OAuth 2.0 is obviously the de facto standard with OpenID Connect in there. They're great. I like them. Are they perfect? No. They're part of an overall solution. So any one of these things will not protect you. You need to consider all these things together. One big caveat with this, and obviously I'm biased because this is my product at Okta. When somebody says they support OAuth, make sure you know what that means. Because OAuth itself is the core specification, and then there's probably 15 or 20 extensions. So somebody can say, I support OAuth, or I integrate with OAuth, but what does that actually mean? Which combination of those wholly optional extensions do they support? Make sure you choose the right ones. Make sure you evaluate, look around and figure out, oh, this is the combination that I need. Frankly, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think the last point here, let me double check real quick. The last point here I want to say is integrate into your existing processes. Remember, the best thing a hacker can have is time. If you give them time to act, they can do everything. They can do anything. They can attack downstream systems. They can do things that you never even considered possible. So the better you can integrate into your existing processes. Don't go cowboy. I'm not sure the European equivalent. Don't go cowboy and do your own thing. Work with your existing teams. About a year ago, August last year, T-Mobile had a massive hack. They found an attacker coming at their API doing the tricky hacker method of incrementing an ID. So they got customer 1, then customer 2, and customer 3. I can keep going, but it goes up to 77 million. Luckily, their security and operations team said, whoa, wait a second, this is not a normal usage pattern. And they went ahead and flagged it. And they were able to flag it and detect that the attackers only got 3% of the 77 million records. Is that good? No. But it's a lot better than it could have been. There's no way we can protect absolutely everything, but we can at least detect and stop things while they're in progress. When I gave a variation of this presentation a couple months ago, I got to this slide, and there's a guy in the back that nods his head, gave me a thumbs up. I'm like, hey, you agree, that's fantastic. He came up to me afterwards, he's like, oh yeah, that was my team. I'm like, oh, cool, so you work for T-Mobile Security? He goes, no, that was my team, that was Paul. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And it was fantastic seeing the result of somebody that they plugged their APIs into their existing monitoring systems. And the security team, because they know their job, because it's their butts on the line when something goes wrong, they were watching and they said, whoa, wait a second, this is not normal. And they stopped it in progress. They're able to pull a fire alarm and stop everything and say, we have a problem, let's figure out what's going on and then fix it. This is where we want to be. That's how we want to do it. So I'll leave you with some closing thoughts. And while a lot of presentations this week left you with answers, I want to leave you with some questions. And so as you start that API, and you've got 5 people to 5 teams to 5 organizations to the whole world, here's some questions to ask yourself. What's the worst possible thing somebody can do with our API? Don't just answer that in your team. Walk around, ask other people. Ask what the consequences are. Do some research, see what your competitors have struggled with. Go to events like this and go, hey, our API does this, what could happen? And you know what? There's a bunch of us in the audience that'll be like, oh, you do that? And we can come up with some crazy, scary things. That's fantastic. Do that. Have those conversations. Next up, think about what happens if, forget an attacker. Let's just say a competitor gets your data. What happens with that? My co-author in the book, he was working with a major hotel chain. And he found a thing with their hotel search API. You could put in an address, a lat and lawn if you wanted to, and dates, and come up with a list of hotels. Pretty straightforward and easy. It had address, phone number, what you'd expect. And then it had this, it was like RNK ID or something. Like, was that a rank ID? Like, what's the rank ID? We talked to the developers, and they said, oh, that's the relative popularity of our hotel within our network right now. I'm like, oh, we could do stuff with that. I'm like, so your competitors could use that to see which properties are popular right now and adjust their pricing to do that. And they said, oh, they wouldn't do that. Oh, that's so cute, isn't it? All right. We need to stop and think, what data do we need to collect and what data do we need to expose? Obviously, GDPR, CPAA, FYZ, whatever it is, those things help address that. We need to stop and think about that seriously. And just because we collect something doesn't mean we ever need to share it again. Have to keep that in mind. Then we need to stop and think, who are our users now? And if we're successful, because we all want to be successful, who are going to be our users in a week, a month, a year? What does that growth look like? Are we ready to handle that? Do we have the sort of systems in place to be able to do that? And then the last question is, how are we monitoring when things go wrong? I don't mean wrong as an outage. I mean that massive attack, that slow, steady, quiet attack. How are we figuring out those things? How are we addressing those? And how do we detect them in the first place? Because if we can't detect them, we can't act. So I want to say thank you, everyone. Have a great one.